What I think is really effective about this method of recording a cover song I'm going to demonstrate is it revolves around using the original recorded version of the song that you're covering, the original track, as a reference. So to be really clear, we're not going to use any part of the original recording, the original song, in our cover, but we are going to use it throughout the process of creating our own cover as reference so that we can recreate each instrument, each part of the song ourselves from scratch. In order to do that, we need to know how to play each section of the track and what each section of the track is. So for that, we're going to use the reference, the original song. Now I have that here, and before I import it into my template, I'll just again point out I've sped it up, so I've actually sped up the original track because I wanted to do it at a quicker tempo, but presuming that you're not going to do that, that you're just going to cover it at the same tempo, then it's just a case of setting the tempo and dragging it into your blank project or your project template if you use project templates. For most popular songs, you can find out the tempo really easily by just Googling it and having a look. What I like to do within Logic, which is the DAW that I use, is use the adapt tempo function, just to be completely sure that I'm getting it right. So if I change the tempo to adapt before adding in a reference track, and then I add it in, what it'll do is it'll analyze the track and show me what the tempo is. So what it's saying here is that it's slightly variable, but it's essentially between 89 and 90 BPM. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to set the tempo. So I'm going to get rid of this now that I know. You can see actually here it's saying 89.79. So it's more or less 90 BPM, and that's what I'm going to set it to. So that's the tempo we're working with now. If you want to quickly double check to make sure that the project tempo here is correctly set to the reference track tempo, then simply turn on the metronome and play the reference track back. We can then hear that the reference track is in time with the project tempo. You can also actually see, just by looking at the transients, that this is the case. They're all aligned to the grid. The next step I'd suggest is to add markers to your project to indicate where the various sections of the song come in or drop out. So for instance, chorus, verse, etc. To do this, again, listen back to the reference track. And when you hear a section come in, add a marker to indicate where in the project it comes in. So now the verse starts here. And it's simply a case of listening through to the whole track and mapping out where each section starts or finishes. Now that we have our track markers in place across the top here to indicate where each section of the song is going to come in, the next stage of this process is to create individual reference tracks from this main reference track here. So we're going to end up with independent reference tracks for each part or instrument within the song. So the bass part, the drum part, etc. And then we're going to build those parts up from scratch using the reference tracks. In order to do this though, you're going to need a stem splitter. Within the latest version of Logic, there is a stem splitter built in. However, if you don't use Logic, or if you use an earlier version of Logic, I will show how to do this using a different third-party piece of software as well. So that'll be a little bit later in the video, but for now, we're just going to use the Logic stem splitter. So to get to it, we highlight the track, we go to Functions, and it's here, Stem Splitter. I'm only going to split, for now, the drums and the bass because we'll use that separate piece of software I just talked about for everything else. So let's split this. It's going to analyze the track here and give us two independent new tracks for just the bass and the drum parts. Now, when I'm covering a song, I'll almost always start with the drums and build the track up from there using the drums as a foundation. However, for this tutorial, I want to start with the bass, because when showcasing this method, it's most effective on monophonic instruments and pitch data, which the bass part is. So that's what I want to start with. So for that reason, I'm going to mute the drums for now and solo this bass reference track that we've just created by splitting the stems. I'll turn it up and let's just listen to it first to see what we're dealing with. The point being, we're going to recreate this from scratch and then delete this reference track once we've completed our own part, our own cover of this track. It's a good idea to familiarize yourself like this with the part before attempting to do anything with it. So I'm already quite familiar with this bass part from the song. What I'm going to do next is we're going to turn on the flex button at the top here, the top menu, and also though within the track. Then open the track and change the algorithm from any of the time-based algorithms to the pitch. So we want flex pitch algorithm here. So once we turn that on, it's going to analyze that. And now if I scroll down to the bass section of the piano roll, or the bass notes, we can see that it's populated almost what looks like a MIDI region, but it's still the same track. It's the audio track. It's analyzed it, and it's going to tell us what the notes being played are. So straight away, as I want to record this part on my bass guitar, that's going to help straight off the bat, because of course I can't just work it out by listening, and that for this section is relatively easy to do. However, when it gets to the more tricky section where it's a faster bass line with shorter notes, if I get stuck or I just want to maybe quicken up the process, I can really hone in now on each individual note, even the short notes, to see what they are before working the part out. Before I play it though myself and create an audio track for that, I want to turn this into a MIDI track so that we can also have a virtual bass part as well if we want. Now, really effective thing you can do here is just to turn this into a MIDI track. So if we go to the the edit menu and go down to the bottom option, which is create MIDI track from flex pitch data, and we select that, what it does here is it's going to give us a completely new track underneath the audio reference track, which is a MIDI track. So if I just solo that, I'm going to first off make sure that what we have is a bass instrument assigned to it. Doesn't matter which at this stage. So I'll choose that one. And now let's hear what it's given us here. Let's see how accurate it's transposed this to MIDI data. Okay, straight away I can hear that for whatever reason, it's, to my ears, that's transposed that an octave lower than it should be. So if I press Shift, Option, and the up arrow, that's going to move everything up an octave. And now let's hear that, and that's much better. Okay. So when it transposes audio to MIDI data, it never does this 100% accurately. You always got to go in and be a little bit hands-on with it. But I would say, looking at that part at least there, that's 80%, 90% of the way there. This part, not quite as bang on, but that's still going to save us quite a lot of time, because we need to now simply tweak it rather than record or write in everything ourselves and work it out from scratch. So because I'm familiar with this part, I know that there's only two real sections to this part. There's this one where there's the sustained note, and then there's the part afterwards that we just listened to, which is the more complicated, slightly faster bass line. And those two parts just repeat throughout the song for the various sections. So what I'm going to do here is create two separate MIDI regions first for those two parts. So let's go back into the piano roll and do that. So here, we'll split the track here, there, and here. And we'll just get rid of everything else because we're going to recreate each part and then just copy and paste it. Now let's listen to this first section. This is sustained notes per 2 beats. So every 2 beats there's a new note sustained. So let's listen. It's given us ghost notes there that we don't want. This is a common thing that happens when you do this. So now let's listen to this again. Okay. It's almost there, but if we highlight everything and simply quantize it, it's on 16th notes, that'll do for this. We can see there that it's put it bang on the beat now, just to click a one button. So I'll undo that, redo, you can see what's happening. Now I want to really tidy this up further by making each note exactly the same length and last exactly 2 beats. So again, if I highlight everything, go to functions now, and go to MIDI transform, then choose fixed note length. What we can do here is set this to 2 beats there, select and operate. And again, if I quickly undo what I've just done there, you can see what that's done. So now that part is completely bang on. Perfect. So now let's move to the second part. This more quicker, slightly more intricate bass line. Now for this, I'm going to manually do it rather than quantize, because each note's a different length. So I think that's going to be quicker. All I need, remember here, is one repetition, correct repetition of that line in order to copy and paste it into the rest of the whole bass part. So that's 2 repetitions of the same bass line. I can hear what it's done there. The second repetition, the end little bass run, is almost spot on. So I'm going to just copy and paste that. How many notes is that? 7 notes. So I'm going to copy and paste that here because it's more accurate. So let's now put that here and hear what we've got. So I can hear there's a note missed out there. Okay, that, again, the second time it's transposed the line, it's more accurate. So I'm going to highlight those 6 notes, and then these 6 notes, 6 notes, and just make sure I've got them, and paste those in. Okay, now that's really getting there. And as I said, now what I'm going to do is, instead of doing any quantizing, I'm going to manually do this to make sure that don't get anything wrong. I know this is going to be correct. Let's make sure that timing's right. Okay. What you can do is turn the reference track back on. So I've got the two tracks now, the MIDI track I've just created and the reference track. And let's play them together and make sure we've got the timing right. Great, that's correct. So we'll mute the reference track again. And now what we need to do is make sure each MIDI region is the correct length so that we can then paste it into the rest of the track to create our full bass MIDI guitar part. So because this starts on bar 2, I just want to make sure the region starts on bar 2 as well. Like that. Same at here where it ends, and that's already bang on. And then here, this is going to finish at bar 8. So let's just make sure that's completely aligned, which it is. Now then, because I'm familiar with this bass part, I know where those two different sections of the bass part come in. The more detailed, faster, more intricate bass line part is on the chorus, and the slower sustained note part is on the verse sections, aside from the first bit of the verse 1. You can actually see it here in the way that it's shown me these notes within the reference track, the audio file. And if you're familiar enough with the part that you're trying to cover, then you'll know where each section should go. So I'm going to fill out the rest of the track here. And it just repeats this all the way out. So that's my full bass part now. And if I highlight everything and press Command J, then it's going to join everything. And I've got a full bass MIDI guitar part there. Of course, if we want to change the sound, the beauty of a MIDI instrument, I already prefer that. We can do that. Now that we have our bass part down for the project, we can go ahead and delete the bass reference track that we created earlier using Logic's stem splitter. So I'm going to get rid of that. Of course, we no longer have a use for it because we've re-recorded our bass part, this MIDI bass part here. The process for recreating every other instrument and part of the song is going to be very similar to what we just covered looking at the bass. Before moving on to the drums though, I wanted to show an alternative method of doing this using third-party software and plugins so that you're not restricted to the functions within Logic. It's also beneficial if you do use Logic to use the method I'm about to show because you're potentially going to get better results as well. So the first program I want to highlight and show is a program called RipX. This is essentially a very detailed and expansive stem splitter program. So I use this a lot to reference cover songs. It's great for working out parts and really drilling down into the detail of each note within each instrument, within each song. So you simply drag your reference track, your song file, into the main window here. And at that point, it'll give you the options of what you want to extract. I'm not going to rip this because it'll take about 5 minutes to render, but I did do it earlier and you can see the result here is quite detailed. You've got a key on the left-hand side, which is color-coded in accordance with the actual note information on the grid here. So it'll become a little bit more logical once I solo a track, say the bass track. And then if I play that back, we're familiar with this now because this is what we've already looked at. But RipX is also giving me the note information as well within the piano roll on the left-hand side. What's really fantastic about this program is that if I want to go into a different section of the song, a different part of the song, say the string section, then it's really given me that in a lot of detail as well. And I can hone in on any particular note within the ensemble. So that's going to be very useful for working out an array of different parts. But for now, I want to recreate what we did earlier with the bass to show the alternative way of doing it using this program. So because I've got this soloed now, the bass, if I go to export, the file menu at the top, then it's going to give me a few options, and I can actually skip a step here and export it straight to MIDI, to a MIDI file, and then import that into Logic in my case, and get straight to the recreating MIDI bass section that we ultimately ended up with. But I'm not going to do that now. I'm going to export it as an MP3, and we'll just call this RipX bass reference and export that. So that's going to export. That's now done, so it's a fairly quick process. And if we go back to Logic, now I can import the file I just ripped. So what we've got now is essentially the same result that we got using Logic's stem splitter, which is to say a individual bass reference track for the song. And if I put that on with what I recreated earlier, you can see that it's the same thing, or the same notes being played. I've got the timing right. Another alternative plugin or piece of software you can use for extracting and analyzing pitch data from an audio file is a program called MIDI, which will work as a plugin in any DAW, I believe. Oh, and by the way, RipX that I just showed you should work alongside any DAW as well. So if I open up the mixer here, the track mixer, and I just insert an instance of MIDI, then what I can do is, if I close the mixer, once the track is armed, so I've got this on the reference track that I just imported, and if I hit record and play that in now, I'll only do a couple of bars here just to demonstrate. Okay, monophonic detection, and there we have pitch information here, you can see on the left hand side. So this is an alternative way of getting very similar results. The next part of the song we're going to be looking at is the drum section. So I've still got this drum reference track in place from earlier when I split the stems of the original song. So the original reference track master file, if you like, this one here that's now muted. What I want to do before recreating the drums is turn on the metronome and turn on flex time here and double check that it's definitely in time. The reference track is in time enough for me to use when recreating my own drum track. So it sounds fine. And that's probably enough to go on. But what I'll do, just where it's slipping here, slightly not on the grid line, I'm just going to use the flex time algorithm to go up here and quantize the whole thing. So if I now undo that, if you look and I zoom in a bit, step out a little bit, you can see there that it's putting everything bang on the grid. You need to be slightly careful when doing this, when quantizing audio tracks, that it doesn't pick up a wrong transient and put the whole thing out of whack. It can sometimes misread audio data like that, so I would never typically trust it without listening all the way through, but I can see up to at least the first verse and beyond that's totally fine for what I want to demonstrate now. So I've got 3 drum tracks open here, which have been there from the start of the video at the top of the project. The drum program I most like using to recreate drums is via MIDI is the program Easy Drummer. The reason for this is that I find it's got the easiest user interface for recreating drums from scratch. Now, people can argue till the cows come home about what the best sounding drum MIDI piece of software is, and I don't honestly have an opinion on that, but I do know that for me personally, what I do, which is 95% or thereabouts cover songs, that I really like the user interface of Easy Drummer. So I'm going to open, I've got 3 instances of it here on these 3 tracks. I'll show you what. So the first one is an acoustic drum kit, which is going to be my main sound. I've gone for the tight room, the dry kit, because I thought that would suit the track best. Of course, as with any other MIDI, the beauty is you can go back and change the sounds later. The second instance is a drum machine. So this has got classic drum machine sounds like 808 and 909, the Lindrum tones. Now, case in point here for what I was explaining about liking Easy Drummer and liking the interfaces, all those sounds are already pre-built into Logic, but I like the Easy Drummer interface, and because I'm used to using it, it's easier for me to use their expansion pack for those tones. The third instance has got some percussion on it, because I did notice listening to the song that I thought I could hear a cowbell and definitely a shaker. So I'm going to use this expansion pack, this percussion pack, to get those sounds. The slightly annoying thing about Easy Drummer is that you've got to buy expansion packs to get things like that, which is a bit annoying. But otherwise, I think it's a great program. So what we're doing, I'll just zoom in here. The reference track, I'll turn the metronome off because we don't need it. Close the mixer. So we're going to listen to the reference track and recreate each aspect, each part of the kit. So we can hear, I mean, I'm not a drummer, but you don't need to be for this. We're just listening to where each part of the kit is falling on the grid line. So the kick drums here are going to be on the first beat of each bar. Okay, and now it's going to slightly change. Let's zoom in, make sure I get this right. Perfect. Right, so there's the kick drum done. What I'll do is I'll recreate the whole drum part up until bar 10 to give an idea into what's involved in the workflow. I'll try and crack on with this and not talk so much. If you want to fast forward this part of the video, then fair enough. As I say, I just want to show what's involved in this. So follow along if you like. I'll only point out things I think are entirely necessary to point out. So I'm just going to go through each part of the kit here and recreate it. I thought I heard like a rim shot or something here. There. Listen. So let's put that in. There. So put that there. Okay, so I'm happy with that. What I want to add next is the shaker. So I need to open the other instance of Easy Drummer for that. Let's, okay, that one. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let's turn it down a bit. Okay. I thought I could hear a cowbell as well. There. Yeah. Sounds like a cowbell. I don't know what it exactly is, but I'm going to go for a cowbell sound. So let's go. I'll stick with that one. That one. The tone's wrong, but we'll fix that in a minute. Okay, let's try something else. That one's better. It's still too loud though. Actually, what we'll do is we'll just turn something like that. Again, this isn't, we'll do all the mixing later, but this is just getting everything in place where it should be. What I also wanted to do on this track is add a drum machine underneath the acoustic kit. So all I'm going to do for that is copy the MIDI file across to this instance of Easy Drummer with the drum machine on. So I ended up putting them both out there. That's it. So now let's listen to this. And we'll turn, I want this to be quieter, drum machine. Okay, at this stage I'm going to turn the reference track off. Okay, that snare sounds terrible, but it might just be too loud, so we'll turn it way down. Yeah. Okay, if I turn the drum machine off, you can see what it's adding. Let's mute it. Okay, just thickening things up a bit. So it's a case of repeating that process for the whole of the track. So it is the most time consuming and fiddly part of this process. But the good thing is using the reference track when it's synced up like that, it's really difficult to get it wrong. And once you've got the beat or the drum part correct, you can then decide on what sound you want to go for. And, you know, you don't have to have it exactly as it is on the original track either. If you want to put in your own fills, say, or something like that, then it's easier to do that once you have the template in place and tweak it. So what I'll do now is I'm going to turn the bass part on, the original bass part we did as well, and listen to now our bass and drum parts that we've created. It needs to be mixed, but we're getting an idea of how this is starting to sound. So, like we did with the bass track, what we're going to do is simply delete this drum reference track once we've mapped out our own drum part. The bass and the drum parts for the cover song are now fully down and recorded in. To complete the drum part, it was a case of finishing penciling in all the notes, individual notes here, within the grid editor in Easy Drummer. This was a process which I started and demonstrated in the last chapter of the video, if you want to recap and look at that. By the way, this process for the drums can be repeated or used when using any other drum software program other than Easy Drummer, or even on a piano roll within your DAW. That way would be more tricky and hands-on, but entirely possible. I've now additionally spent a bit more time choosing the sounds exact sounds I want for each part of the drum kit as well, from a range of different samples, what I think is going to suit the cover song best overall, and spent a bit more time in the mixer tweaking the output levels. Now, I'm by no means getting involved in the final mix at this stage, and that's not what this video is about. It's about the process of recording the song in. However, I do think it's important to make sure the balance is right between the tracks, especially as you're adding more in, so that you can make sure that you're definitely recording everything in correctly and getting an overall idea what it's going to sound like later on. This will mean that you're not having to constantly go back over old ground and old territory, re-recording things, or constantly tweaking settings and mixer settings, things like that. So I'm going to play a little bit of the verse section of the song now to make sure I'm definitely happy with it before moving on. So this is the drum and the bass part. Before I do that as well, I'll just point out that I've recorded another bass track in, which is a like-for-like duplication of the bass MIDI part we got down and recorded earlier. So that was this. And this is the same part being played on an actual bass guitar. Go back to the chorus section. MIDI, audio with a real bass. And if you add them together, it actually gives a really massive, thick bass sound for the song that's going to really fill out that low end. So let's now listen to a section of the verse with those two parts together, make sure we're happy with that. So now I'm happy and okay to move on to the next part of the song we're going to cover. I can go ahead and delete this drum reference track, which is what we use to map out our own drums. This has served its purpose and is no longer needed, so let's delete the track. So that cleans things up a bit. For the next section, I'm going to look at the strings in the song, so the string part. We'll go in and have a look at it in a minute, but before I do, I'll point out I've created two new tracks here, violins and cello tracks. So that's what we're going to be using first and foremost, and the plugin I've got for my string sounds is this one, which is a Spitfire Audio plugin. They're really good company for orchestral instruments, software instruments. I'm going to use RipX, which is the stem splitter software program we briefly looked at earlier, to dissect the string part and work out what's being played. I'll also change this camera angle so that you can see I've got a MIDI controller set up here, because I'm now going to arm this violin track here for playback as well, not for recording yet, but for playback. And now if I play some notes, you can hear that that's being triggered. So let's jump into RipX and highlight the strings, solo it, and I'll play the string part now, which repeats itself throughout the song in isolation to see what we're dealing with. And it's always good to familiarize yourself with a part before you try and work it out or recreate it. So that's what we've got. What's jumping out here is these notes. Which in fact are being repeated across an octave higher and an octave lower respectively. So that's the same notes just being played in different octaves. And then there's also a bass part to the string section as well. I don't know if this is actually real strings on this recording. It could well be a synth or something. I mean, RipX has identified it as strings, but I wanted to record it in as a string part regardless. So it's even telling us on the piano roll what the notes are. So see C to B, C to G, then back to C. So because this isn't a complicated or intricate part, I'm not going to bother now with a reference track because I don't think I need it. So instead, I'll just see if I can play it. So that's it really. So let's jump back into Logic. I'm now going to arm the violin track for recording, set up a 4-beat count in, turn on the metronome, and I'll also move this MIDI controller so that it's in a better position for viewing. Now let's hit record and see if we can play this part in. Okay, let's see what we've got here. Open the MIDI region. I need to extend the length of it a little bit so I'm not chopping off the start of the notes. Now, with MIDI string parts, it's usually necessary to spend a bit of time positioning the notes correctly or optimally. Unlike some instruments, like say a guitar, where you pluck a string and there's a very fast, quick transient before a fast decay of the note. Usually with string sections like this, there's a swell up into the peak volume of the note. So it needs to be carefully positioned, usually slightly before the beat. It might be different depending on the composition or the project you're working on. So a classical piece may have a lot of flow between various sections of the orchestra, but what I'm dealing with here is a really steady bass and drum beat. So the strings have to match that. Now, there's all sorts of things you can do with the MIDI once it's recorded in. So I can Command A, select all the notes, quantize, try quantizing them. Or we could go to the MIDI transform menu and do a fixed velocity so they're all the same volume. So for example, 110, try that. Now they're all the same volume, these notes, same velocity. But if you do that, it can start to sound a little bit robotic. So alternatively, we could select a random velocity, but set the range so that it's not too extreme. So we could go from, say, I don't know, 80 to 110. Another thing to point out here is the velocity can perform different functions depending on what string plugin or piece of software you're using. It's not always going to change the volume, so that's an important point to make. With strings, it's good to set articulation and the modulation within the automation section of your DAW as well. Now, this video isn't about how to make strings sound realistic, so I'm not going to go into that anymore here. Suffice to say, though, there's a lot of information about online to check how to make your strings section sound realistic. Spitfire Audio themselves do a lot of content on this, so you can check those videos out. For now, I'm going to leave this part and move on to the cellos. So I'm going to arm the cello track here and take a slightly different approach now. So I'm going to turn on this loop section here at the top of the project, and this will repeat the first few bars of the project over and over. And I'm going to see if I can experiment a little bit and get a cello part that sounds good. This is the part of the project where I want to use a little bit more creative license rather than going all the way through trying to repeat everything note for note. Of course, I could always go back into Rip X and mimic this part, but I don't want to do that now. I've got the main fundamental part of the strings down. Now I want to experiment a bit and put my own stamp, my own spin on this cover. So let's repeat this section and see. Again, I'll move the MIDI controller so that it's in a better position for viewing. Oh, and I need to lower the octave here. Something like that. Or perhaps I think I prefer the first pattern. Let's try that again. Yeah, I like that. So now, instead of playing it in, I'll take a different approach and write the notes in, which is another way of doing it. So if I open up, create a blank MIDI region, then open it, then use the pencil tool, we can put the notes in this way. So I think what I played before was G sharp, yeah, to F, I believe. And I need to get them in the right position. Then I believe it was G. Yeah, then C, I think. Again, perhaps these don't need to be exactly on the grid, but I'm gonna get the part in for now. We could always tweak it in the same way I explained with the violin section later, but I'm not going to spend any more time on that for now. So here we've already got the makings now of a complete string section. I could keep going, and I probably would and will keep going, and create, say, a viola section. Skipping forward a few steps in the process, this is what I've ended up with as an overall string section for the cover song. 5 tracks, each with its own stringed instrument applied, playing a different part within the overall string ensemble. I've also begun to colour coordinate tracks within the project. This is common practice to keep things nice and tidy. Typically you do it via group, instrument type or bus. And it's a way of quickly identifying where everything is if you've got a particularly busy or large project on the go. Where we left off in the previous chapter of the video, I was demonstrating the process of recording and playing in the string parts. I'd already got this first violin part down and was in the process of recording and playing the cello part, deciding what to play for that. As a continuation I'll solo these two tracks and play them. And there's a slight variation on the second time through, yeah, on the cellos. So that's where we left off. Now I'm not going to explain what I played for the next 3 string parts, but I will play the first 8 bars through and incrementally add each part in so you can hear how it adds harmony and depth to the overall string section. Better to use headphones for this if you can. Before we move on to the next part of the song we're going to cover, I want to discuss a topic I think is important when covering a song, and that's copying and pasting regions, particularly MIDI regions, to fill out tracks. Now, a lot of commercial rock/pop songs have repetition in them. So, for example, the bass part in verse 1 will be exactly the same as the bass part in verse 2 of a song, as is the case actually in this song we're looking at here. So for parts like that, it's entirely possible and plausible to record 4 to 8 bars in and then copy and paste it throughout the rest of the track. A good example is the violin part that we covered in the last chapter of the video. This part here. Now that part is a repetition of these notes throughout. So I'm not going to sit for 3.5 minutes or however long the song is and record all that in, because it's not an optimal use of time and it's not necessary. So we can record a few bars of it and then copy and paste it. Indeed, when I've been going through the process of covering this song throughout the various chapters of this video, I've mainly been solely concentrating and looking at the first 8 bars of the song and then presuming that you would probably copy and paste what you do for those 8 bars throughout the rest of the track, or at least copy and paste them in to provide a template to then tweak and do some subtle variation. And that's what I would do a lot of the time with MIDI tracks. But you need to be very careful, because the sections of the song where things drop out, and a good example in this song is at the end of chorus 1 into verse 2, the strings completely drop out. So I'll play this briefly. They come in again about halfway through the verse, about a third of the way through the verse. In addition, I actually got this part of the bass track wrong when I initially recorded it in via the MIDI bass instrument. So there's a note here before the strings come in where it actually drops out. The bass drops out. And when I recorded the bass part in on the bass guitar, I heard it because I was recording it all in one take, which is what I typically do with real instruments, so guitars, basses, etc. And because I'd copied and pasted the MIDI bass that we did in the first chapter of the video, I totally overlooked that it did that. So I'll play this, and it's one note, but it actually makes a really big difference. So I'll play it as I recorded it incorrectly here. So that's where the strings come back in verse 2. And what actually happens is this note here, this bass note, drops out, and I put it in unintentionally by copying and pasting. So without it, it sounds like this. And it's actually quite a big difference, because the point of that section of the song is to have a really stark transition where everything drops out bar the drums and then everything else comes back in. And if you leave that one bass note in, it diminishes the impact of that transition. So one more time. As opposed to... Now, whilst it wouldn't be a total disaster getting that wrong, because it's not like the note's dissonant or anything, this is an example of how you can get things wrong. So it's one note on this occasion, but by being a little bit too blasé when copying pasting, you could get something worse wrong. And it's always a nightmare if you've got through the entire mixing and mastering process and then you realize something in your song's wrong, because you've got to go back into the weeds and sort it out and then mix and master everything again. So you want to just avoid that as much as possible. So I would never copy and paste whole regions without listening carefully to the whole track first, making sure that it's correct. Okay, let's now look at the choir part for the cover song we're doing. I've created 3 new tracks down here. We'll use these to record the part in and also to create a reference track if we need one. Now at this point I want to flag a potential issue that might occur when using the stem splitting method that I've showcased throughout this video. I don't want to sugarcoat or gloss over any difficulties, and at this juncture there's one that's worth talking about. At the end of the song here, everything drops out apart from the choir section that we're looking at. That's really helpful because it means to create a reference track, we don't actually need to do any stem splitting. I can highlight the entire section here and just export that if I want to. And there I have my reference. However, if this wasn't the case, if the song happened not to end in this fashion with 4 bars of choir section being played in isolation, then it would be a lot more difficult to A, create a reference track for the part, and B, get RipX to give us any accurate note information. The reason for that is that in the voice part over here, if I solo it, what it's done is it's isolated and ripped both the choir part and the main vocal part as one. So it's considering them as one part and one track in the mix. Technically, they are both vocal parts, and this is why it's done that. So it's heard them both, or however the algorithm works behind the scenes, it's identified them as vocals and lumped them together. So it means when you zoom in the chorus sections of the song where the choir is being played alongside or behind the main vocal, it's a little bit confused, all this information. You never quite know what you're getting when you highlight. Like there's a good example where there's both choir and vocal being played. So it's a lot more difficult to then use this. I would say it's still better if you're working out the part, especially by ear, than listening to the entire song and trying to work it out that way, because at least you get rid still of all the other instruments. But I wanted to highlight this and identify this as a potential frustration or difficulty. The other time it happens quite a lot is in songs which have guitar solos in them, because often guitar solos are played alongside or with a rhythm guitar, or even two rhythm guitars. And you're going to get the same thing then, is all that information, note information from the rhythm and the lead guitars together as one. Let's head back into Logic though. I want to quickly show you what I'm using to get the choir sounds. It's this application, another one from Spitfire Audio called Epic Choir from their original series. And I've actually got two instances of this open. One for soprano and altos and one tenors and basses. This is how they sound. Okay, so hopefully I'm going to be able to create some nice ensembles with this. Let's go back into Rip X. We're in the right section of the song. Yes, I am. Now I'm going to see if I can work out these notes and play them in, record them in. So another little frustration with Rip X here. If you look on the left-hand side with the keyboard roll or piano roll, it's telling me that whole passage is a C note. But if we count the note changes, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's 5 notes. So not very helpful information. I can, however, work this out. And what I'll just do is I'm going to change the camera angle and move the MIDI controller into a better position there. So we can hopefully follow this process. And I'm going to attempt to work this part out and play it in. Next. Okay, that first note is overlapping, so I'm going to ignore that first note there. So that's one note. Yeah. Okay, 3 more notes. I think it's just chromatic. Yeah. So the whole thing. Let's therefore jump back into Logic and see if we can record this in. This is being recorded into the chorus section of the song because that's where it plays. So let's have a go. Okay, let's play that back. I'm happy with that. Let's now switch to the other instance of the choir app with the basses on and go back into Rip X and see if we can work out some of the harmonies. So this was the part I just played, and there's this other part here. So let's work out that first note. There, C. Three more notes. Then we have another C. It's chromatic again. So that's the same as the last 3 notes in the last passage we played, but an octave lower. So the whole thing. Okay, now if we put that together with the previous part we recorded, let's practice first. I'm not going to record it in yet because I want to make sure I play it right. So that's it. So I'll quickly record this in. And then it would be a process of working out the rest of the harmonies and adding them in. So I probably need another instance of the Choir app open at this point. And remember, again, the levels and the mix, everything else will be tweaked further down the line. This is the process of recreating the parts. I've now completed all the parts for my cover song with the exception of the main vocal melody. There are one or two additional steps I've also taken since we last left off. Firstly, I've converted the Easy Drummer tracks into MIDI regions now within Logic. That's why it looks different at the top of the project. It's also color coordinated now. The drum parts are exactly the same as they were. The only difference is now that the MIDI information is being read from Logic, the DAW, rather than the Easy Drummer plugin. The next thing I did was to go through the entire project and add in some volume adjustments and automation data. The reason for doing this is to give the song some sort of flow and add in dynamics. The way I've been explaining this process right from the start, as we've gone through every individual part of the song, each instrument within the song, has been to record in 4 to 8 bars of the part, make all the necessary adjustments, and then simply copy and paste it throughout the rest of the project. That's why there's lots of different regions in the track window here. I've already explained one of the pitfalls of doing this in a previous chapter of the video, which is making sure that you get everything in the right place and where it 100% should be. The other thing you need to be careful of when taking this approach is making sure that your song doesn't sound robotic, which it can do if everything is just a repetition throughout the whole song. So I'll quickly demonstrate what the automation data looks like. This is it here on the strings section. And if we zoom into the main violins, I've actually got this on the volume automation, and the volume's also changing for the various sections of the song. So when you do this with every track or even a few of the tracks, it's going to give your song a flow and some sort of dynamic feel as well. So I'm not going to linger on this point because, again, that's not what this video is about. But I just wanted to point it out because it may have oversimplified the process by suggesting that all you need to ever do is copy and paste 8 bars and hey presto, there's a cover song. It may sound fine doing it that way and not adding any automation data. It depends, and it also depends on the genre of the track that you're recording as well. So if it's an EDM track, that might be different to if it's a rock track or a pop track, whatever. So you need to take that into account. What I'm now going to do is I'm going to play this first part of the song, so about half of the song that we now have complete, up until halfway through the second chorus. I've added in some additional tracks here, which are synth tracks, still MIDI tracks, but I've attempted to recreate some of the vocal melody part. Now, I'll probably not use these, or maybe only use some of what I've just done here. I wanted to do this to demonstrate how you can add vocal melody without actually singing. If you're a vocalist, it might be at this stage that all you need to do now is record your vocals in. If you just want a backing track, then we're pretty much done. I'll play this from the top then, and as we get to each region with notes in, I'll pull the region up in the window at the bottom to give a better view of what's actually happening. And this is just an example of the kind of thing you can do. What I'll be doing after this is recording the main vocal melody on my guitar. So I'll be creating or writing a guitar part which incorporates the vocal melody. Here we go then. This is what we now have. For the main vocal melody during the chorus sections of the song, I will be playing the following part on electric guitar. That is a chord melody approach to the main vocal melody in the chorus. If I were to play the same part, the same melody, but as single notes, it would sound like this. What we're doing, therefore, is building those single notes up into bigger three-note chords or dyads. The second chorus, or you could call it the pre-chorus, I think I even called it the bridge in my track markers within the project we've been working on. That part is this. I'll now play both of those chorus parts together in the mix we've been working on to see what that sounds like. I also added a wah effect in that recording because I thought it worked really well with the part. It's got a very funky, choppy vibe to it, which I thought the wah really suited. I'll now explain what's going on in this guitar part for the chorus section for any guitarists out there or anyone else who might be interested. The chord progression for the chorus is G sharp major to F minor to G major to C minor. The first melody note is a E flat, so that's being played over the G sharp major. It's actually a fifth, it's the fifth of the chord. So it's being played as, the melody note is being played as a 4-string chord, but it's a 3-note chord because this repetition is, that fifth is repeated. Yeah. Then we have a root, so we've got 2/5 a root, and then this note here, which is the A sharp or B flat, turns it into like a suspended second feel because that's the second degree of the G sharp major. So that's the first chord melody part or note turned into a chord. Then we have this, and that's played over the F minor, and that is actually giving another sus2 feel. What we have is 4 strings but only 2 notes repeated. And the C is the 5th of F minor, and then the G note is the 2nd degree. There, it's a root on. So we've got, is the sound of that with the root. Then we've got this G major shape here. So that's a very simple G major triad or chord shape. And what it is if you know your D major, the open chord position down here on the 2nd fret, which is one of the first chords everybody learns, it's that same thing on the 7th fret, and then also with a B there on the 9th fret. Like that. So we have, sorry, wrong fret, we have, so that, then some single notes, and the last 3-string chord is actually a dyad. And what that is it's from over C minor, and we have a root, a 5th, and another root. Then on the 2nd time through, it goes here because the melody changes slightly. And that shape is very simply an A flat major triad shape. So, same thing. So you're playing there, we're on the 13th fret. And then you add an F note to the melody like this. Again from the top. Then this looks a bit like a C minor arpeggio if you added the root to it there. It's almost like a C minor, but it's played over the F minor. And what that's giving us is a F minor 9 or added 9, because if we look at the notes, we've got a C, so a fifth, then we've got a G, which is the second degree, and then we've got this note here, which is the E flat, and the E flat turns it into the seventh. There's no A flat, which it would need to be in the full F minor 9 chord, which would be like this, or with a root on. So you can get bogged down in chord theory here, but I wasn't thinking about any of that when I worked this part out. I was purely starting with the melody notes and thinking, how can I extend them into like small chords, so i.e. 3-note chords or dyads. Then, after this, is that same G major shape that we just looked at. Then, a couple of double stops. C note, and then played on the octave. So that's the first part of the chorus section. The second part is very similar. It starts with that A flat major shape or triad that we just looked at. So this sounds like this. And repeating. So it's that with the F note added and pulled off. And this same shape that we just looked at, which was giving the F minor 9 or add 9 feel, put over the F minor chord. Then we've got this, so this is over the G major chord. And what this is doing is it's turning the G major into a dominant 7th feel, rather than a straight major, because we've got a D note, which is the 5th, then we've got the root, G, so we've got a 5th, a root, and then crucially here, an F note, which is turns it into the dominant 7th. There's the F, as opposed to the root in a straight up major sounding chord. And then it's back to this shape again. So the whole thing. There. Then here. So you add a D note. And it repeats. And so on. I'm going to play now something similar to what I record for the verse vocal sections of the song. The verse is where the rapping happens in the song, so I wasn't going to try or even be able to replicate that. Instead, I went for some predetermined licks, improv playing, and just trying to emulate some of the rhythmical and melodic aspects of the rap. Tonality-wise, what I played centres around C minor, C harmonic minor, some chromatic ideas and passing tones, such as this. The bass part played on an actual bass guitar is as follows. This is the chorus section. And then the verse section is the longer sustained notes, and that's just this. Now, it's going to be difficult for me to tell you what those notes actually are without putting the tuner on, because I had to detune every string by 2 tones to be able to play this part. The lowest note in the progression is a low C, which is the low C below this standard E in 4-string regular bass tuning. So if I'd had a 5-string bass, that would make this possible to play without doing any detuning, because there'd be that lower 5th string. But without that, I've had to detune the whole thing to keep it in standard tuning as well. So instead of going through the notes, I'll just physically show what this is on the fretboard. So that chorus, the quicker bass line, is so if you want to know what that is, you can slow down the video perhaps and work it out. The slower verse section with the sustained notes is much easier to play. There's that low C there. It's just the 4th note in the progression. For the guitar and bass tones, I played through a Line 6 Helix rack. I also used a couple of Neural DSP plugins on the DI signal. I'm not going to spend any time discussing signal chains or the exact amp settings I used. If you're interested in those subjects, there's a lot of great content already available on YouTube. I also find that most guitarists have an idea of what equipment they like using and particular tones they like, which is of course all a matter of taste. We're now at the very end of the recording process for the cover song. All the parts and tracks are down and in place. I'm happy with how they sound. The only step that remains is to perform the final mixing and mastering of the project. I'll play the song through from start to finish to show how it sounds. Bear in mind that it will probably still sound slightly different from the final song once it's been mastered and fully mixed. But from this point on, the only changes will be minor ones. hope you enjoyed and were able to gain something out of watching this video into how to record a cover song from start to finish. If you have any comments, please stick them in the comment section and I'll do my very best to reply. Before I sign off, I do want to make clear that this video is purely for tuitional purposes. I don't intend to make any money out of it. It was to offer a service to a few people who'd asked me about what my process is into recording a cover song, and I didn't see a whole glut of other content into this subject area already online. There's loads and loads in how to mix a song and how to produce music in general, how to use various bits of software, but I just thought this was a little niche where there wasn't already a wealth of material out there. So that's purely the only reason that I've recorded this video. And as I say, I hope there's at least something in the various chapters that can be of some help for you. And I really appreciate everyone who's subscribed to my channel and is watching the videos. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you soon.